Welcome back, Barbarians. I've got some material for you today that I've been sitting on for a while. Most of it is stuff that I've wrestled with in my own life, and I think that you'll benefit from that. This isn't going to be a how to list or a 5 step program. What it's going to be is an honest conversation about something that the culture has spent a long time speaking into and made more complicated than it really needs to be. And in doing so, has quietly convinced a lot of people to stop fighting for something that was worth fighting for. So if you're here, good. If your spouse is in the car with you, even better. This is going to be a little bit for everyone, and including the young know it alls in the audience who have yet to throw their hat in the ring. I'm going to speak to the men mostly because that's my lived experience, but I'm going to speak to the women also who are doing this as a team with their man, or at least hope to at some point. And I'm going to ask both of you to stay engaged when it's not your turn. What I say to your spouse is also for you, just from a slightly different perspective. We're going to be discussing marriage covenant versus contract. This one's going to hurt a little in places where it hits a little too close to home, not because I want it to or I intend it to, but because truth has a way of doing that when you've been avoiding something for a long time. You start to believe your own bullshit. So if it puts a light on that, great. As always, as you reflect on your marriage, don't overcomplicate things either for the sake of it. Don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to forgetfulness or an overbooked calendar. We'll talk about how those things kind of work and where they show up, but enough of that. Welcome back. Let's get right into it. To start with, Dr. Tony Evans spoke at Lake Point Church on this topic, and it is one of the best talks I've ever heard on the subject of covenant versus contract. So I don't need to recreate what he's already done because it was awesome. One story in particular really stuck out to me as the most honest picture I've seen of what is happening in most struggling marriages, behind closed doors, and even the Sunday morning smiles. He talks about a crack that's in his bedroom wall, called over a professional painter. Painter came, patched it up, repainted it. It looked great. About a month later, crack's back. Called the painter back, same result. 40 days after the crack returned and brought the whole extended family, as he puts it. Cracks multiplied all the way across the wall. So he gets a second opinion. New guy comes in, stares at the wall for a long time, and then says, "Sorry, I can't help you." Evans then says, "What do you mean you can't help me? This is literally what you do." The guy says, "You don't have a problem with cracks on your wall. Those cracks are symptoms of a deeper issue. Your real problem is a shifting foundation. Until you fix the foundation, you're going to have these band-aids to apply forever." And I know that feeling. I've been there. The busy work, the exhaustion from those patch jobs can literally begin to feel like you're doing something effective because you're exhausted and it's effective work. But it's not. Because most of what couples are fighting over, the money, the intimacy, the communication, that never actually goes anywhere. The same argument recycled, slightly different words, maybe for the 14th time. Most of that's showing you cracks on the wall, real cracks, painful cracks. But if you keep patching without addressing what's underneath them, they keep coming back every time. And with more company, more hurt, more piled up debts and issues and pain around it all, every trip around the wheel. So what's the foundation? That is what this episode is really about. And the honest answer across every serious study that makes marriages last and across every tradition that's wrestled with this question, whether religious or academic, keeps coming back to one thing. What kind of agreement did you actually make? And are both of you still making it daily with every interaction? Expectation management on this, as always, one episode is not going to miraculously save your marriage. But I do hope that it arms you with the perspective and the language to start that process. You can't deal with what you can't see or name. So a contract is a transaction. You give me this, I give you that. Both parties perform. One stops performing, the other one gets released, or at least fairly compensated for that breach. It's clean, comfortable, completely built on today's economics, and everyone gets it, even from a young age. Contracts are designed for marketplaces. They assume both parties are primarily looking for themselves, and they build that protection in accordingly. A covenant, on the other hand, is something different altogether. A covenant doesn't ask what you brought to the table today. It asks, what did you promise and whether you're still living in that promise. It isn't contingent on how you feel this Tuesday or this Thursday or how hard this season has been. A covenant says, I'm bound to this, not because you've earned it today, but because I made an oath and I intend to honor it, regardless of the current performance review or last intimacy rejection. Honestly, those lines have blurred almost to the point that most people can't really tell which one they're actually living in when they say the word marriage. You said those words for better or worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part, and you meant them when you said it. Most people do. But what you actually live out daily, what the culture has slowly trained you to mean underneath all that language is, as long as this works for me, as long as I'm getting what I signed up for. But we always keep an out just in case, right? A rainy day fund and old contacts that are saved in our phone. I'm not throwing stones here. I've been on both sides of that line. I know what it looks like from inside the covenant, and I know exactly what it looks like when the covenant breaks down and the contract thinking creeps in. And you don't notice it right away until you're already somewhere that you never intended to be. The, oops, shouldn't have said that, shouldn't have done that. It's a trap you built for yourself out of contract language. Contract marriages don't survive the hard seasons, not because people in them are bad, because a contract was never designed to hold under that kind of weight. Contracts are built for fair weather. Covenants are built for the storms. And every marriage has storms. No exceptions and no exemptions. The question is never whether it's coming. The question is, what did you build before it arrived? Because you can't shore up your foundation in the middle of a hurricane. You build those reserves before the weather turns bad. Whatever the crisis is, that flat tire, the delayed flight, the job loss, the sick kid, the unexpected bill, it's all a completely different experience from a couple that's operating from a full covenant than from one that's already running on fumes. Same event, completely different outcomes, based entirely on what was built before it happened. Dr. Evans frames the covenant this way, and I think that he nailed it. He says, a covenant is like an appliance warranty. The manufacturer stands behind the product as long as you use it the way that was designed, right? You use it for something that it wasn't built for, and the warranty voids itself. A marriage works the same way. Operate within the covenant, the love, the respect, the showing up, the staying present when staying present costs and hurts, and there's a covering over that relationship that nothing outside of it can replicate. Chip away at that foundation, though, through contempt, through avoidance, through the slow withdrawal of everything that made this worth choosing, and the warranty starts voiding itself one interaction at a time. There was a reason that you said yes. There was a reason you said, I do. Pray on that daily if you have to, because the reason is still there underneath all that shoddy patchwork somewhere. You don't have to share my faith to recognize that structure, because what Evans is describing is confirmed by 4 decades of relationship science. The marriages that last are built on something deeper than feelings and deeper than daily performance reviews. Think about it this way. Imagine if your salvation was held to a daily pass or fail standard. None of us would make it to Tuesday, man. The covenant isn't contingent on your performance today. That's exactly what makes it work. So, okay, before we talk about where things go wrong, I want to spend a minute on what does that design actually look like? What does right look like? Because I think a lot of people walk in a marriage with a vague picture of what they're building toward and no real blueprint on how to get there. Or when they got married, they were just in dating fatigue, or they wanted to have regular sex, or just didn't want to deal with the stress over paying bills every week. The culture gave them a wedding, but it didn't give them a marriage. And Tony Evans again points out to the origin of marriage in Genesis and makes an observation there that most people have never framed this way. He says, God didn't create Eve as an afterthought or a companion piece. He took a part of Adam, his side, not a rib. The Hebrew word is closer to side, and he fashioned something from it, which means that Adam was already incomplete when Eve arrived. Half of what he was meant to be was walking around separately, and it isn't until the two become one man, one woman, become one flesh, that we can hope to achieve anything remotely close to what God intended for us in his design. That isn't a small idea, that's the idea. the design that the whole world was built on. Two incomplete people becoming something greater than either of them could have ever achieved on their own. Never meant to be the same, though. That's something that we need to make very clear. You don't come in and blow out your individual candle to light the unity candle. You bring your full self, your full uniqueness, your full spirit into a shared purpose. And in that process, you become more than you were, both of you, separately and together at the same time. That is the covenantal picture. Two people actively working to make each other more, not managing each other, not merely tolerating each other, not coexisting in the same house with separate phones and separate schedules and the occasional Saturday that you get together for. That marriage is something that Sheldon from Big Bang would probably draw up a roommate agreement for. The research confirms this from a completely secular direction as well. Dr. John Gottman, after 4 decades in the Love Lab, which I mentioned last episode, at the University of Washington, studied over 3,000 couples and found that the marriages which lasted and thrived weren't the ones without conflict. That's a completely unrealistic picture of marriage. No, the strongest unions were the ones where both people maintained what he called a culture of appreciation, the consistent, intentional practice of noticing and naming what is good about the person that you chose, not just tolerating the hard parts, actively looking for and speaking to the good ones. 5-to-1 is the ratio. Gottman found that 5-to-1 was the ratio that separates stable marriages from failing ones. 5 positive interactions for every negative 1, and the marriage holds the line. You can have arguments. You can have hard nights and hard arguments, but the couples who lasted kept coming back to 5-to-1. The ones that dropped below 1-to-1 and stayed there, Gottman could predict that they wouldn't make it with 90% accuracy from just a 15-minute conversation. And I'd wager that most of us can. To be clear, that's 1 negative interaction for every good one. Many of us have been there and experienced that hopeless exhaustion in one way or another. I want the younger listeners especially to hear this out of what I just said, though. You don't have to be perfect. 5-to-1 is very achievable odds. You're going to make a mess of it. That's guaranteed. The question is whether you're building enough of the good stuff that the hard stuff doesn't define the whole picture. Not perfection, just a direction. So if that's the design, 2 people becoming more than what they could be separately, how does it end up looking like most of the struggling marriages that I've seen close up? How does the covenant become a contract without anyone acknowledging that it's switched? It isn't usually a dramatic moment. It isn't one catastrophic decision. It's a drift that starts slow, quiet, almost invisible, in the direction of transactional encounters. And it happens to good people, Christians and non-Christians alike, all professionals, all social, economic, and educational backgrounds, people who meant every word at the altar. It usually starts something like this. The early years are full, the attention, the adoration, the intentionality, and all of it's dialed up because you're still in pursuit mode. You're still competing for each other and actively looking for and taking down the dragons in her life. You're still paying attention to the gap between where things are and where you want them to be, because you're not maintaining something at this point. You're actively building towards it and you're excited about it. And then somewhere along the way, different timelines, different triggers for every couple, but you stop fighting for each other's hearts the way that you used to. You got the ring, you made the team, and congratulate each other. And somewhere in the back of your mind, whether you meant to or not, the pursuit feels over. The books never really tell you how to live happily ever after, do they? They just do it, right? No. It's work. It takes daily work and a lot of maintenance. So going back to what's the difference here between covenant and contract, all right? In a covenant, the pursuit's never over. A contract says the negotiation concluded at signing versus, again, a covenant says, I'm going to continue choosing this each and every single day, not because I have to, because I woke up today and, again, chose to do my part, and I'm taking this back. The participation trophy marriage is real, and I've watched it play out more times than I really care for. Seemingly good men who were excellent at the dating game and stopped trying the moment that they had a ring on her finger. Good women, likewise, who were warm, engaged, and intentional, And then once the title was secured, just stopped with no explanation or warning. And the person on the other side feels it. They always feel it. They may not have the language for it right away, but they feel the moment that the pursuit ended, just like you know from a general stench of roadkill and death is nearby, the decay of it. And something in them shifts in response to that. Too often it's defensive and fight or flight kicks in a self preservation mode that's emotional, mental, and spiritual that begins to dominate their thoughts. Jordan Peterson gives us an insightful truth on this in 12 Rules for Life. Treat yourself like someone you're responsible for helping. I'd extend that directly into marriage. Treat your spouse like someone that you're responsible for helping. Not competing against, but competing with. Do not let your marriage become something you're just tolerating, because your spouse can feel the difference between being loved and being tolerated in the same way that you can feel it too from them. And your kids pick it up even faster. They're taking notes on what commitment looks like, even when they have no language yet for what they're seeing. Now add the weight of real life happening around you to the drifting that's happening to both of you. The bills, the renovation, the job that got harder, the kids that got more demanding, the exhaustion that became the new norm. Two people who started building something together slowly start operating in a completely separate lane from each other out of necessity, and then that necessity becomes a habit. That habit becomes an identity, and that identity becomes just how we do it now. The contract mentality seeps in not without any kind of declaration, really. It's more of a series of small withdrawals from each other. He stops asking about her day with genuine interest and starts doing it out of obligation. She stops speaking into his life and encouragement and just starts managing and correcting instead. He then stonewalls because the conversation has become a place where he only loses ground and he has to sit in the driveway for 10 minutes extra every single day before he can even walk in, just to fix his face. She, in turn, withdraws that respect because the vulnerability required to do it is too much to ask for, too much to risk. Both of them are technically correct in their assessments about what they're experiencing, both drawing wrong conclusions from what their perceived hurts are telling them. Gottman's research identified the 4 horsemen, the 4 communication patterns that predict the end of a marriage with over 90% accuracy: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Of those 4, contempt is the most deadly to the marriage. So let's define what contempt is before we move on. Contempt is defined as a feeling or act of regarding someone or something as inferior, base, or worthless. It's often expressed as scorn and disdain. We're all attuned to pick up on these displays from people around us, from the emotional intelligence and survival position that we find ourselves in. So again, the number 1 indicator was not fighting. It was contempt. The eye rolls, the sarcasm, the tone of voice that communicates without words, I deserve better than this, and I'm exhausted from pretending otherwise. When contempt moves into the covenant, it's not just under pressure anymore. It's actively being dismantled, one shared experience at a time. It's the little things that pile up. The good news, though, and it's not all bleak, it's not all bad, is that the gap is reversible. It closes the same way that it opened, one interaction at a time, in the right direction. The covenant is still there under all that patchwork, waiting for someone to take it seriously again and to begin that long work of dealing with a debt. Just like financial debt, emotional debt will require a long and consistent input to make positive moves back towards even neutral, and then in time into the positive, where you're positioned to win even in the face of the inevitable setbacks that life brings you. I want to spend a few minutes on something that nobody's saying for fear of being canceled or unpopular. Because when the covenant breaks down and nobody's addressing it, or when the hurt goes on long enough and the needs go unmet long enough, people don't just sit quietly with that. And where they go is an early warning sign if it's caught in time. It's a crack on the wall telling you that something is wrong with the foundation if you know where to look. So you know that I like my stats. They're a really good compass. They point you in the right direction, save you a lot of time, and increase efficiency and accuracy. The CDC reported in 2025 that depression prevalence among U.S. adults increased 60% over the past decade. 60%. More than 1 in 10 adults took prescription medications for depression in 2023 alone. I'm not here to tell anyone to throw away their prescriptions, okay? I know glaucoma and all of that, right? That conversation belongs literally between you and your doctor. But I do want to ask the question that the docs holding the prescription pads aren't asking. How many of you are treating symptoms while the cause is sitting across the table from you unaddressed? Unhappy marriages are one of the most consistent predictors of depression and anxiety in all of the research. And depression makes it harder to show up in the marriage, which makes the marriage worse, which deepens the depression. The snake eats its own tail until there's nothing left. A 2025 peer-reviewed study also confirmed what most people already sense. Marital satisfaction and alcohol use demonstrate bidirectional causality. An unhappy marriage predicts increased drinking. Increased drinking predicts an unhappy marriage. They feed on each other. A man who can't name the emptiness is going to find something else to fill it. A woman who doesn't feel seen or wanted at home will find something else that makes her feel seen or wanted. The glass of wine that becomes 2, that becomes 3, and then the whole bottle just to get through the week, that isn't a character flaw in isolation. That is a predictable response to a foundational problem that nobody's addressing. And it's there that the other person starts to identify failing performance. Performance to the contract, and you're in it. Just like that, you're now making reviews on each other's performance day to day, and the list is starting to pile up. And then there's a screen, all right? A 2023 Common Sense Media study found that more than half of married men, 55%, report viewing pornography at least once a month. Sometimes on this show, we keep it light, keep it dapper. Sometimes we have to get real and barbarian and grit down and clean out that scary basement. So let's look at this research. Research from Utah State University and multiple peer-reviewed studies show consistent links between pornography use in marriage and reduced emotional intimacy, distorted expectations, and on the partner side, betrayal and mistrust that bleeds into every interaction. It comes to the dinner table, it widens that gap that sent someone there in the first place. And this isn't anything that you don't already know, but it isn't stopping you. So here's a stat that might get your attention. Repeated use of pornography also significantly increases erectile dysfunction. You're welcome. So women, you're not exempt from this. Emotional substitutes, the parasocial connections with podcast hosts or other digital influencers who seem to understand her better than her husband does, the romance novels that have shifted from escapism to comparison, the group chats that get a lot more honesty in them than the man sleeping 6 inches away does. None of that's a physical affair. But ask any man who's watched it happen and he'll tell you that it's just as damaging. An emotional affair can leave a man looking over his shoulder and second-guessing everything that comes from his partner for the rest of his life. And the one the culture even applauds, work. Research estimates that 8 to 10% of employed people meet clinical criteria for work addiction. And the research is also very clear that in a significant number of cases, it's not ambition driving it, it's avoidance. The job validation in ways that you can't find in the marriage, and the marriage stopped doing a long time ago, at least there, someone tells you that you did something right. Maybe it's even the new girl or the guy at the loading dock. And the marriage gets the leftover version of you. Tired, distracted, half present, and then you wonder why together doesn't work anymore and it doesn't feel the same. It can be work, it can be fitness, art, the kids, and yes, I've even seen it acts of service at church or in the community. Because who could fault the overworked saint for neglecting their spouse's needs, right? But I've seen it. These aren't absolute truths. There are exceptions to every rule, but thinking that you are that exception and basing your life around it is a quick way to a hell on earth that you'll need to deal with sooner rather than later. These are symptoms. Every single one of them is a crack on the wall telling you that the foundation needs attention. The good news is that when you go after the foundation, the symptoms are getting addressed along the way. For the young men in the audience, and the women too, but the young bucks definitely need to take notes on this one without exception. There's nothing more important to your success in life than who you choose as your spouse. Absolutely no exception to that. Not your career, not your education, not where you live or who you know or how hard you're willing to work. All of it can be undone or multiplied by one decision. That person standing next to you. The one that adds to or alleviates your burdens. The right woman is a helper that carries you, tired or not, toward your destination. She believes in you and believes in that better version of you. She speaks into that version of you that doesn't exist yet and calls it forward like it's already there because she sees what literally no one else can. A good woman guards your future, your reputation, and your heart. On the days that you come home completely empty, she recharges your battery. The wrong woman is a parachute on your back and a weighted vest as you tread dangerous waters every day. She's not necessarily evil or even aware of it. She may even love you in her own way, but she'll deplete you. She'll draw from the well for everything she needs and without ever asking how deep that well goes or how much might be left. And yes, the same happens to women, and I'm speaking to young men here directly because of my experience, but young ladies, you can also apply the same. So choose carefully. Watch how they treat people who can do absolutely nothing for themselves. Watch what they do when things go sideways, especially with a server. Watch whether she builds or tears down. The hard days are the real test, not the first date with the butterflies, but character shows up or doesn't when things get truly hard. And ladies, this one's more for you. Never take a man seriously who can't fast. I think it was a pastor, Joby Martin, that first said it. And yes, I'm talking about fasting from eating, but it involves so much more than that. A man who can't say no to himself in the small things when nobody else is watching won't say no to himself in the big moments when everything in him is at war with his ethics and his morals. When the temptation is strategically placed there because the enemy gets a vote, when the stumbling block shows up at his most vulnerable moment across a screen or in a dark truck cab, a man who's never practiced saying no to himself or others has nothing to draw on in that moment. So self-mastery is a prerequisite for everything else that a man is going to build and bring to the covenant. Fasting is visible proof of discipline that can't be tested effectively by other ways. It's a man demonstrating to himself, not to you, that he decides what his body does, not the other way around. You want a man who's been in that war with his own flesh and won enough rounds to be able to show it. Not a perfect man, there's no such thing, and run from anyone that's trying to perform that perfection for you, but a man who's in that fight and hasn't surrendered. Watch for that before you watch for anything else. The income, the ambition, the charm, none of it lasts very long if the man can't govern himself. Obviously, fasting isn't the only way that this shows up, but it's a damn good place to start. Pardon the interruption, barbarians. If you haven't already, a like, follow, or subscribe goes a long way and costs you nothing. This show, the Dapper Barbarian Show, is my own project. This is something that I pour myself into because I truly believe in these conversations. If you want to help make that better, our Patreon link is attached, and your support there goes a long way to allowing me to invest more into the show, be more hands-on with you, and to grow this thing the right way. So thank you to all of you that do. Separately, I want to take a moment for something that's far, far more important than this podcast. I want to thank you genuinely to all of you that continue to support Mission 991. You're the reason that we continue to stay in the fight, and your faithfulness matters a lot more than you know. For those of you who are new to the cause, in 2022, I founded Mission 991, an anti-trafficking and exploitation nonprofit that was born out of a need that I couldn't just walk past. Edmund Burke once said, "All it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." We can't do it all, but we can continue to do the next right thing, in hopes that it creates space for someone to begin to heal. Sex and labor trafficking is a three-part industry, a three-legged stool, if you will, and it stands on a trafficker, the client, and the victim. Each of those legs requires its own strategic response, but the end goal is always the same: freedom from abuse, exploitation, and addiction. At Mission 991, we partner with agencies and tailor our response to where that need is greatest: education and awareness, field digital intelligence gathering and analysis, and victim aftercare. We leave the 99 in pursuit of the one, and we raise our voices for the ones who can't, so that we can rejoice with heaven at their safe return. If you're not yet a shepherd, I want to ask you to consider it. A recurring gift, even the small one of an overpriced coffee that you were going to buy anyways, goes directly toward the basic care and long-term rehabilitation of victims in our areas of responsibility and in the pursuit of them. That's the trade-off that I'm asking. A little bit of your comfort for someone else's freedom and for the ability to them feel human again. So you can learn more about what we do and become a one-time or recurring shepherd at mission991.org. Thank you so much. All right, so enough of that. Not to get too preachy, we've named the issue. We've looked at the design. Now let's talk about what the covenant actually asks from both of you in daily practice. Because a covenant isn't just a posture or a feeling. It's a set of daily practices, and they're not the same for both of you. Ephesians 5 makes an observation that cuts through all that noise, and culture is built up around that text that husbands love your wives, wives respect your husbands. Those are two different commands, two different words chosen specifically because Paul understood something about how men and women are actually wired that Gottman spent 40 years in his lab confirming from a completely secular direction. Evans puts it like this: a woman's core need lives in her heart. A man's core need lives in his head. We call it ego and treat it like a character flaw. It isn't a character flaw. It's how we're wired. And a marriage comes down to whether two people are learning to tend both their heart and their head, not because it's transactional, but because that's what both of you are actually hungry for and have been needing since the beginning, when you thought maybe life shared with an intimate partner beats being lonely with all of that freedom. So a man who's loved but not respected will eventually stop leading. He steps aside, goes somewhere else to be valued, and hands over everything to let someone else drive, because at least somewhere he feels like his presence matters and it's something that is valued. Likewise, a woman who's respected but not truly loved, more of a professional kind of roommate situation, will stop being vulnerable. She becomes competent, self-sufficient, armored up, and handles everything herself, needs nothing from anyone, and calls it strength. So does the world around her. But in reality, it's just organized form of grief. And don't get me wrong, both can get there entirely on their own and individually outside of this whole breakdown of the covenant, where it happens through the speaking in from social media, toxic friend groups, and unrealistic visual and literary erotica. You can start believing the lie that you're living in a bad relationship when you're actually in a pretty damn good one. Here's the part that determines whether any of the rest of this actually works in your real life, not just as an academic exercise. Because you can understand something like a covenant perfectly, know exactly what love and respect is supposed to look like, and still be stuck because of how the things have accumulated between you and the person that you chose. That accumulation of every snide remark, every disrespectful joke, and every rejection of intimacy has a name. That name is unforgiveness. One of my favorite theologians, Voddie Baucham, has done some of the best work that I've found on exactly that. Forgiveness, actually what it means in practical terms. Barney style. Barney style enough for me to understand it. And his definition cuts through everything that culture has muddled up around this idea. Forgiveness is canceling a debt. I'll say that again. Forgiveness is canceling a debt, not pretending that it didn't happen. Not performing a feeling that you don't actually have, not saying what was done to you was okay. It's literally canceling the debt, giving up your right to collect what you believe you're owed. Here's another way that it gets practical inside of the marriage. The way that we make people pay for what they've done to us in a close relationship is by withholding attention, affection, and honor. The cold silence that fills a room. Again, attention, affection, and honor. The stone face, the tone that says everything that your words are carefully not saying, that is the currency of unforgiveness, what you're extracting from them. And you can operate in that for years while telling yourself that you've moved on. And I've seen couples who couldn't agree on what the original offense even was, because they've been so focused for so long on extracting an imagined debt that's made the ledger overcomplicated. One goes back 5 years, the other goes back 7 years. Nobody can remember what they're actually fighting about because the fight stopped being about the issue a long time ago. So now it's about the perceived debt. Who owes who and what the payment has to look like before anything can feel normal again, nobody even knows. So that isn't a covenant. That's a cold war with a shared mortgage and a poor dog caught in the middle of it. Pastor Vodi makes a distinction that I think matters here a lot. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Reconciliation requires both people's cooperation. You can't drag someone into a restored relationship. Sorry. But forgiveness, that road you walk alone. You can forgive who has not asked for it. You can forgive someone who will never put aside their pride long enough, because forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you giving up the right to keep punishing that control and that power. It's about putting down that poison. Because unforgiveness is exactly that, drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die from it while you're the one getting sick. So that might be how unforgiveness looks like. Now let's look at repentance. And repentance and apology are not the same thing, not even close. An apology is a statement. It costs you no more than the air it took for you to say it. I'm sorry, I hurt you, I'll do better. Sometimes it's genuine in the moment, but an apology without a strategic change is just a ceasefire. It's not peace. A pause just for a minute before the next offense. If you've been in a real relationship for any length of time, you've been on both sides of this, and you know exactly what I mean. You can feel the difference between an apology that costs somebody something and one that's just trying to end the conversation and move on. Repentance is also known as metanoia in Greek, a turning around. In Greek, it literally means a turning around, a change in direction. It isn't what you say, it's what you do differently from that point forward, consistently, without being reminded every minute. So a person who's genuinely repented doesn't need to keep apologizing for the same thing, and you shouldn't ask them to or demand it of them because they're no longer doing the same thing. That is how you tell the difference. Have you ever seen someone do this in their health? Like they just hit that wall and made a deliberate choice to live differently. Maybe because they want to be here for their grandkids, or because they were out of breath going up the stairs and they finally noticed it. They saw it in themselves. And that change, it's an amazing thing, isn't it? And what do we always say? Damn, dude, you're like a brand new man. Because with repentance, he is a brand new man. Men, I'm putting this on you first. If you want her to trust you again, if you want that version of your marriage back where she looked at you like you were worth believing in, stop apologizing and start repenting. She knows the difference, even if she's never had the words for it. She knows because she's been counting the apologies and watching for that change that never came, and now no longer believes the empty words. Ladies, same goes. Your man knows the difference between a performance of remorse and an actual direction change. The false promises of more affection, intimacy, and affirmation that when they don't show up for longer than, a day, then it starts to feel like manipulation. Like you'd say just about anything to get what you want and get back to business as usual. Also, as we're looking at this repentance and unforgiveness, let's not forget that if your relationship is in a debt when it comes to any of these, you're going to feel like you're putting in with no return for a while until you build that foundation back up above the floodwaters. There's no version of this that doesn't suck, for a while at least, but we got to put in the work to harvest the better fruits later. Before I close this out, I want to say one more thing because I think it's the most important underused argument for fighting for your marriage. This isn't just about you. Again, the story came up from Dr. Evans about how his parents were on their way to divorce. His father found faith, turned his life around, and stayed in the covenant. His mother eventually followed. 4 kids, came to faith. Evans became the first in his family to finish high school, college, and earn his doctorate. He built a ministry and a body of work that now is heard all around the world. His children went on a film, ministry, and chaplaincy. He traces every bit of it back to one decision. His father didn't quit when the marriage was hard, and the exit was right there. So close, I bet that people were ushering him towards that door, but his father stayed in the covenant when the contract had long expired. And the ripple of that decision, of holding that line and still moving forward through it, people have no idea what almost wasn't. That generational sowing was good seed. You don't have to share Evan's faith to respect the work and sacrifice of a good man and the work and sacrifice of his children to honor it. One person chose to stay and hold the line. Generations changed direction because of it. The Institute for Family Studies documents that children from intact families are significantly less likely to experience anxiety disorders, depression, and a range of other outcomes. That isn't judgment for anyone going through hard times. That is an honest account of what is at stake inside of the decisions that we make inside of our marriages. And yes, there are reasons to divorce. Abuse, obviously. But through counseling and after a lot, and I mean a lot of work, I acknowledge there is a time when one of you have to decide that you don't want the contract you're being offered in place of the covenant that you were promised. Your kids are watching you practice who you are. They're taking notes on what commitment looks like when it costs something that is felt, not seen, on whether love is a decision or just a feeling you follow until it gets inconvenient. They don't have language for what they're absorbing. They're just absorbing it. And one day they'll take it into their own marriages, and you'll see it show up in ways that you can trace directly back to what they watched you do here today. And what will you tell them? That that's just the way it works, kid, and it only gets worse from here? No. Fight for it. Not just for yourself, for the ones that are watching you, and for the ones not yet born who will inherit whatever you build or leave behind. This is just me here for a minute, but I truly believe that a man and a woman can enter into a union. The two become one without a piece of paper or whatever state you live in being involved in it, and it can be a fruitful covenant and bring joy to the Creator. Yes, law of the land and all of that, but His law comes first. Likewise, I truly believe we're all in danger of finding ourselves covenantally divorced in every way that really matters while living out a contract at home for decades until we just die in bondage to it. This is the hill that I'll die on if I must, and you can ask my wife. We don't have it perfect by a long shot, but I refuse to live in a convenient and safe life without passion and without real intimacy. Even if those discussions cost me a week of cold shoulders and rude remarks, because I don't do the sleeping on the couch thing. Hell nah. My house, my bed, we will share this thing in anger if we have to. My point is, some of you, unfortunately, are already there, living out a contract, and you're here because you want more, but the other one doesn't. Find a pastor and wise counsel, not a hype man to walk through it with. I do very occasionally do coaching on a case-by-case basis, but I don't have all the answers. Best I can do sometimes is turn people towards the answers that they've been avoiding. All right, so as I get close to closing this thing up, I want to re-emphasize something that I covered last episode, Romans 5. We rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. Paul didn't write that as a consolation prize. He wrote it as instructions to act on: suffering, endurance, character, then hope, in that order. You don't get to skip to hope, but it's there at the end of hard work and a hard road if you stay with it. So if you want to know more about that, like I said, go back, listen to the previous episode. So I'll leave you with these three things, both of you, for your marriage. Decide today what you're actually living out from here on out. Not what you said at the altar, what you're living right now. Covenant or contract. Name it honestly and painfully if you have to, because the drift doesn't reverse itself by accident. It reverses by a decision followed by another one. Pick one specific interaction this week where you choose the covenant versus the contract that would let you off the hook. Just one and build from there. And if you're good, great. How do you implement the maintenance needed? How do you stay that way? Second, for each other. Men, be in the room with her, not just around, be present. Pick up Mindful Meditation, which is a podcast of its own if you have to and you don't know what mindful and in the room means. Ladies, speak something true and good into your man this week. Not to correct him or manage him, something that tells him you're still for him and that you still need him. It isn't weakness, and he needs to hear that you need him and you see him and you feel that. And stop keeping score when you do these things for each other, guys. Third, for yourself, make this the beginning of something new. Reconciling is a turning point. What are we turning from and what are we turning towards? Mental, physical, and spiritual, because they are all one and they all matter. Is your marriage a covenant or a contract? Only you know the honest answer to that. But here's what I know. If you're still in the fight, still showing up, still willing to have this conversation, then the covenant is still alive. And that's not nothing. It's a good place to start. And you begin from there and you do it again and again and again. And the distance begins to close. It closes the same way that it opened, one interaction at a time, in the right direction, over time. The little things daily, that's the whole game. So keep moving, keep falling forward, hold the line for each other. And thank you for holding the line with me across our community and across our nation. So we're in good company. I'll see you next time.